Due to the social engagement of Councillor Carr, we will begin. Thank you, my good friends. I'd like to call us to order. This is, I think, the first ever joint session of the Environment and Climate Change and Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee meeting. So welcome, everyone. I do want to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I would like to call upon the committee coordinator to conduct a roll call, please.
Testing.
Councillor Bradley.
Here.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Curry.
Here.
Councillor DeRoche.
Here.
Councillor Devine.
Hello.
Councillor Dudas.
I'm here.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Luloff.
Good morning, Chris.
Councillor Plante.
Ici.
Councillor Tierney. I see Councillor Tierney on the screen. Vice Chair Hill.
Present.
Vice Chair Carr.
Here.
Chair Brockington. And
Here.
Chair Menard.
Present.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Committee Coordinator. And we recognize Councillor Kavanaugh, who's here as well. And I do believe Councillor Johnson will be participating remotely when she can join us.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tierney. Excellent. Any declarations of interest for today? Seeing none. We have one item of substance for our agenda today, and that is the idling control bylaw review that our staff have conducted. I would like to recognize the acting general manager of the Emergency Preparedness Protective Services Department, Pierre Poirier, who will present or commence with a few introductory comments.
Thank you, Chair. For today, this is a follow-up on committee council direction to review the anti-idling bylaw, going back for the 23 to 26 review period. So it's part of their work plan, and they're bringing forward the anti-idling bylaw today. So I'd like to turn it over to Valerie Bietlo.
Thank you. And just before you begin, I'll just recognize we do have 5 delegations who've registered, so that we have a staff presentation first. We will receive our delegations, and then we'll take questions from the joint committee. So please proceed. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Acting General Manager. Good morning, Chair, Vice Chair, and members of Joint Committee. I'm here this morning with my colleague, Matthew Suatak, who is the Bylaw Review Specialist in the Public Policy Development Services who conducted this bylaw review. We're here today to report on the results of that bylaw review and to present our recommendations for amendments to the city's idling regulations. Specifically, we're recommending updates to the current bylaw to reduce unnecessary idling in the community based on research, engagement, recommendations from Natural Resources Canada, and best practices adopted in other municipalities. Reducing unnecessary idling, even by just a few minutes, can contribute to reducing air pollution and improving air quality. Reducing unnecessary idling also leads to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, which cause climate change impacts. This goal aligns with the city's climate change master plan and supports Council's priority of creating a greener and more resilient city. Finally, reducing unnecessary idling is also a sound fuel-saving measure, which is good for everyone. I will turn it over to my colleague Matthew to present the results of the review and give you the highlights of our recommendations. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Valerie, and good morning to members of Joint Committee. Bonjour aux membres du Comité joint. I'll begin with some background before moving into the policy recommendations. The idling control bylaw was first enacted in 2007 to restrict unnecessary idling for the purposes of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and improving local air quality. The 2007 bylaw and the recommendations we're presenting today apply to idling vehicles only. So that means when the vehicle is stationary while the engine is running. None of these regulations apply to vehicles while they are in traffic. Under the current bylaw, vehicle idling is restricted to 3 consecutive minutes in a 60-minute period, with 12 exemptions for vehicles and situations where no time limit applies. These exemptions recognize that some vehicles or situations require idling beyond any set limit. For example, currently, vehicles assisting in emergencies are exempted, as are vehicles that are idling for servicing and repair. We'll discuss these exemptions in more detail shortly. In July of 2022, Council directed staff to review the idling control bylaw as part of the bylaw review work plan. And the direction has asked staff to consider specifically the maximum idling time limit, the exemptions to that limit, clarity of definitions, and enforcement tools and practices.
Les recommandations du personnel sont fondées sur des analyses comparatives et des consultations. Nous avons consulté la recherche et les recommandations de Ressources naturelles Canada concernant la marche au ralenti et son effet sur le climat. Nous avons aussi analysé plus de 30 règlements municipaux sur la marche au ralenti d'autres villes en Ontario et à travers le pays. Nous avons publié un sondage sur Participons Ottawa et nous avons aussi invité des associations communautaires et d'autres groupes de la ville à y répondre. Ceci comprenait 5 autres sondages qui ont été distribués aux secteurs qui sont présentement exemptés du règlement afin de recueillir leurs commentaires, y compris les zones d'amélioration commerciale, les groupes d'entreprises de la ville, les entreprises de construction et des services publics et les associations agricoles, entre autres. Finalement, nous avons aussi consulté le Comité consultatif sur l'accessibilité et le Disability Coalition Ottawa pour en savoir plus sur les liens entre la marche au ralenti et l'accessibilité.
The recommendations are based on extensive benchmarking research and consultations. Staff consulted Natural Resources Canada's model idling control bylaw and conducted a jurisdictional scan of over 30 idling control bylaws in Ontario and across Canada, including conversations with enforcement staff in other Ontario jurisdictions. A public survey was posted to Engage Ottawa and promoted over the city's social media channels and with public service announcements, and it received 1,045 responses. Staff also invited community associations and other groups to participate. Separate from that public survey, additional surveys were distributed to industries currently exempted from the idling regulations to gather their feedback, including, for example, armored vehicle companies, motor coach, tour bus, and school bus companies, construction and utility companies, and rural agricultural and landowner associations. The bylaw review is also presented to the Ottawa Disability Coalition and at the April Accessibility Advisory Committee to learn more about how idling intersects with and can improve accessibility. Taken together, this research and consultations have informed the policy recommendations for the new idling control bylaw. Next slide, please. The three main recommendations regarding the idling and temperature limits that together can improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gases. Beginning with the idling limits, staff are recommending a reduction in the maximum idling time limit from 3 minutes to 1 minute for several reasons. 1 minute is recommended by Natural Resources Canada. They note that vehicles do not require an excessive warm-up period before driving off, and that 1 minute is a good balance between emissions reductions, saving money from wasted fuel, and avoiding wear and tear on your engine with too many restarts. 1 minute also reduces air pollutants that are harmful to health. And 1 minute has been adopted by other Ontario municipalities with similar climates to Ottawa, including, for example, Toronto, Burlington, and more recently, Kingston earlier this year. Staff are also recommending the introduction of a new 5-minute idling maximum for occupied vehicles in hot and cold weather. So that means when the exterior temperature is colder than 0 degrees or warmer than 27 degrees, including humidex. The reason we are recommending this change is because under the current regulations, there are no idling limits when it's colder than 5 degrees, including wind chill, or warmer than 27 degrees, including humidex. And what this has meant, dating back to 2007, when the bylaw was introduced, is that there has been on average 245 partial or full days a year, which is around 8 months a year, where there have been no idling regulations in effect. This 5-minute idling cap addresses these missing months, and 5 minutes is recommended because it provides time to de-ice or defog your vehicle or to cool it down, depending on the time of year, while also providing a reasonable limit to excessive idling. The recommended temperature thresholds that would trigger this 5-minute idling cap are in recognition of Ottawa's diverse climate and of the impact that hot and cold weather can have on people and on vehicles. The recommendation is to keep the upper temperature threshold at 27 degrees, including humidex, and to move the lower limit from 5 degrees to 0 degrees. Lowering this lower threshold represents minimal vehicle or health risks, and it gains additional months where the 1-minute idling maximum is in effect. This means that when it's colder than 0 degrees, you can still idle to de-ice your windshield or to warm up your vehicle, for example, but we're recommending that this be limited to 5 minutes. It's the same thing when the weather is hot. When it's warmer than 27 degrees, including humidex, you can idle to cool your vehicle down, but again, for a maximum of 5 minutes.
Selon les informations du ministère des Transports ainsi que les données de Ressources naturelles Canada, nous estimons que si chaque conducteur de véhicule à combustion interne léger ou moyen à Ottawa diminuait son temps de marche en ralenti par 2 minutes par jour, au bout d'une année, on éviterait d'envoyer dans l'atmosphère plus de 31 millions de kilogrammes de dioxyde de carbone. Ceci correspondrait au retrait d'environ 6700 voitures des routes de la ville, à la plantation de 14 850 arbres et à des économies d'environ 20 millions de dollars en carburant, selon un tarif de 1,50 $ par litre. Ces résultats ne sont que des projections, bien évidemment, mais cela démontre ce qui serait possible si chacun diminuait d'un petit peu la marche au ralenti chaque jour.
Based on information from the Ministry of Transportation and from calculations from Natural Resources Canada, we estimate that if every driver of light and medium duty internal combustion vehicles in Ottawa were to reduce their daily idling by 2 minutes, so from 3 minutes to 1 minute, for example, over the course of a full year, that would equate to over 31 million kilograms of carbon dioxide removed from the atmosphere. So to contextualize that number, it's equivalent to removing 6,780 cars from city roads. It's equivalent to planting 14,850 trees, or to saving around $20 million in fuel, assuming $1.50 a liter. This is not to say that if these regulations are adopted, that this will be the outcome after the first year. Rather, these estimates are meant to illustrate what a reduction in idling can represent in Ottawa, should drivers reduce their unnecessary idling by just a few minutes. Next slide, please. The current bylaw sets out a number of exemptions. These are vehicles or situations where idling is permitted beyond the recommended maximum limits. Following extensive consultations with impacted industries and with internal and external partners, we are recommending 11 exemptions to the idling time limit. 6 exemptions are recommended to remain the same, including, for example, vehicles that do not pollute while idling, such as electric vehicles, or vehicles that are idling for servicing or repair. We are recommending changes to 4 existing exemptions. For the mobile workshop exemption, we are clarifying the definition to mean when idling is required to operate work equipment that must be powered by the vehicle's engine. And so this includes, for example, concrete mixers, vehicles operating lifts and ramps, or waste collection vehicles operating their hoppers. For the motionless vehicles exemption, we are recommending the addition of drive-throughs to clarify that vehicles are exempt while in those queues. And this is similar to how traffic is included in this exemption for the same reason. We are maintaining the medical letter exemption, and based on advice from the Accessibility Advisory Committee, we are expanding the field of medical professionals able to issue such a letter to beyond only medical doctors because of the difficulty in accessing physicians that some residents are experiencing. And we are removing the broad exemption for the City of Ottawa's vehicle and equipment idling policy because the requirements in the policy now match the bylaw. we are including an exemption for public transit vehicles because they idle for longer periods for mechanical and operational reasons. We are recommending a new exemption for emergency service vehicles while in operation or training activities, except when for the convenience of the operator. This language is aligned with best practices from other municipalities and with what Natural Resources Canada recommends. This language has also been approved by all of the city's emergency services. And finally, we are recommending the removal of one existing exemption, and that's for parades, races, and council authorized events. Idling in these situations would be covered under the mobile workshop exemption to operate equipment like lighting, for example, or because in the case of parades and races, the vehicles are in motion. Next slide, please.
The implementation of these new updated idling provisions would occur with an education and awareness first approach. Throughout the fall and winter, we'll be building information and education campaigns and continuing to raise awareness around the regulations, the harms that unnecessary idling can have on air quality in the community, as well as the impacts on the climate and on the environment. We'll also be preparing information on the fuel savings that reducing unnecessary idling by just a few minutes a day can create. Going forward, enforcement will continue to occur principally on a complaint basis, where residents can contact 311 to lodge a complaint. A progressive enforcement approach will be used, and bylaw and regulatory services staff are here to provide further information if needed. As directed by Council, we have reviewed the enforcement provisions of the bylaw as part of our work. We're recommending 2 changes to strengthen the available enforcement tools should they be needed. The first change is a provision that will allow enforcement staff to issue infractions against the driver of the vehicle, as is currently the case, but also the owner of the vehicle when necessary and where warranted. The second enforcement tool is the ability for enforcement staff to issue daily and increased fines in situations where there are escalating, repeat, or egregious offenses. The new bylaw would come into force on January 1st of next year, and this creates an implementation period during which the new regulations could be communicated by various means, as discussed earlier, and includes a training period for enforcement staff. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the presentation. Merci.
Thank you, Manager Biello and Mr. Suak for the presentation this morning. Just for context, in 2022, it was Chair Menard who brought forward a motion which Council endorsed to have this bylaw included in this term's work plan and to consider the maximum idling time, existing exemptions, clarity of definitions, and enforcement tools and practices, including fine amounts. So the recommendations that we see before us in the report also aim to reduce unnecessary idling in support of the climate change master plan and our strategic priority for a green and resilient city. So thank you for the work that went into this review and the presentation this morning. We will receive delegations now, and following delegations, open at the floor to joint committee members. So the first registered delegate is Ms. Jennifer Humphreys from the Community Associations for Environmental Sustainability, and delegations just sit over here. So welcome, Ms. Humphreys. All delegates have up to 5 minutes. So when you get close, I'll give you maybe a 30-second warning, but you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I've titled my remarks this morning, Ottawa's Idling Control Bylaw, Why It's Time for a Change. Next slide, please. Here's what I'll cover today. My focus will be on why it's time for a change in the bylaw, what we support as cafes in the new bylaw, and what is missing. Cafes, as you see, next slide, please. Cafes, as you see, is a network of 200 individual and organizational representatives across all wards and over 50 neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Here's why it's time for a change. Since 2007, when the first idling control bylaw was adopted, our city has changed dramatically. We have more people and we have far more motor vehicles on our roads. And under our new official plan, we aim to be the most livable mid-sized city in the country. Under the new zoning bylaw, we're aiming for greater density in many neighborhoods. We also want these to be livable. We've adopted a climate change master plan that sets citywide targets to reduce GHG emissions. And since 2007, the impacts of climate change have become vastly more apparent. Tornadoes, floods, and last year's wildfire smoke, which pushed us to 10 plus on the Air Quality Health Index, literally off the breathability charts. Now we need to prepare for even more severe weather events. Next slide, please. What else has changed? We've lived through a convoy which enveloped our downtown and surrounding neighborhoods in toxic diesel fumes. Among other lessons, the convoy taught us how much air quality matters in making our city truly livable. Next slide, please. So what about cost? Councillors are discussing our city budget and facing big challenges. At the same time, almost half of Ottawa's GHG emissions come from transportation. Looking at our city's own fleet, eliminating unnecessary idling would reduce fuel costs and mean less wear and tear on vehicles, resulting in lower maintenance costs. Reducing idling is low-hanging fruit when it comes to both GHG reduction and cost savings. Next slide, please. For all of these reasons, CAFES has been advocating for a stronger idling control bylaw, and we support these key changes. Yes to 1 minute, yes to 5 minutes below zero and above 27. And thank you to the staff for this report. Next slide, please. However, while supporting these key changes, we find two elements of the report to be seriously lacking. These are education and enforcement. The staff report signals their importance, but allocates no new resources. On education, the report indicates that there will be a communications plan using the Ottawa website, PSAs, social media, etc. In our view, this is inadequate. Top of mind for us are our children and their schools. We have funding for signage that warns drivers to slow down for our kids. So while we care about their immediate traffic safety, don't we also care about their respiratory health? Ottawa Public Health says that children are particularly vulnerable to the health impacts of vehicle emissions because they breathe in fumes directly from the tailpipes. Next slide, please. Here's an example of signage from BC and a handout from the city of Gatineau. Next slide, please. Here's a poster designed by a Hopewell student as part of a competition that we held a few years ago. Kids know that idling is not good for them. The argument in the report that idling control signs would compete for attention with other city signs, city traffic signage, just doesn't wash with us. In this city, we have the creativity to come up with vibrant signs that share a clear message. And all of us just received a householder about the new 3-item garbage limit. This was great. This is the kind of blitz that we need for the idling measure. Next slide, please. Finally, we come to enforcement. It's just not good enough that the online portal can't handle a video because it's over 6 megabytes. At a minimum, there should be a direct email address to bylaw where we can send these videos in. Look, residents don't want to tattle on their neighbor who idles for 5 minutes on occasion.
30 seconds.
What they want is the delivery truck driver who idles while eating lunch or texting in his vehicle. But they want to know that when they report repeat offenders, these systematic offenders, these egregious offenders, that their reports will be dealt with. Ultimately, we believe, as does the staff, that this bylaw is not chiefly about penalties, but more about encouraging good behavior. That said, where there are serious abuses, there has to be a mechanism to enforce it. Closing slide. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Right on time. Before you depart, there are some questions from committee members, and I'll turn first to Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Jennifer, for the presentation. I guess my first question for you, I think is, my first question is going to be about enforcement. And I think we're going to talk a lot about enforcement today and the balance between what we would like to accomplish and how we're going to get that accomplished. So it appears straight up that bylaw will be hard to enforce. So do you have any further thoughts on that issue?
Yeah, and I really do think that enforcement is critical in these, egregious cases, repeat offenders. Neighbors see vehicles, usually trucks. It happens to be construction vehicles, delivery vehicles, just sitting there idling and texting and eating lunch, often idling in the summer with their windows open when they could very well just turn the car off and sit with the windows wide open. There has to be a mechanism. In New York City in 2019, they implemented an online complaints portal, and those videos that are accepted at 3 minutes and longer. So the technology is out there. Yeah, there may be a cost to that. But look, we're 5 years on. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way to zip files to send them in. And there has to be somebody in bylaw. We've spoken to, at a certain point, spoken to the bylaw people, and they are interested in enforcing. There are other simple ways, so what I'm saying is residents are keen to participate in this, but they don't want to, tattle on their neighbors. That's not the point. For example, we also have parking officers who are very vigilant in making sure that we are not parking for longer than 1 hour in a 1 hour zone, etc. Could they not be, cross-deputized to deal with some idling cases? I'm sure they see them, but at this point, do they actually have the authority to do anything? Do they even have a handout that they could put in a window? Other things about enforcement, we have these speed cameras, and I think that's great. We really need that. My understanding is that once, the snapshot's taken, goes right in automatically, and automatically a ticket is issued. Could we not have cameras around schools, for example, key hotspots, stay on to identify idlers? Is that something that could be looked into? This may be something for a little bit down the road, but it's something that could be started. The exploration could be started now, and I think that would really help. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. I think what I'm hearing from you, Jennifer, is that your interest is in some investment in enforcement. But I think what I've also heard is a lot of talk about egregious behavior for which I think our current bylaw would still allow for enforcement action. So certainly I'll engage with staff further on both of those issues, but I appreciate the presentation today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Blunt.
Yes, and thank you so much for being here. I loved your presentation. I especially loved the picture you posted from that the child had drawn at Hopewell. If I'm not mistaken, that's a school in the Glebe, correct?
It's in Old Ottawa South.
Old Ottawa South. Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure it was downtown. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So just a quick question, and I'm going to really give a very specific example from my ward. So in my area, we have a road called King Edward, and a lot of transport trucks are idling on King Edward because of the traffic situation. And it's not a secret, that is a very low income area. We have shelters, we have about 2,000 Ottawa community housing doors, injection sites, etc. So the lore in the community is there's no sort of solution for King Edward because it's in, a low income neighborhood, whereas the other proposed solutions are in wealthier neighborhoods. Parking that aside, does cafes have a position about idling trucks?
Yes, in the sense that trucks idling, and I'm not talking about when they're in traffic, I'm talking about when they are stationary, and often construction vehicles will idle while they're eating lunch, while they're texting, while they're chatting outside, out the window to a colleague. And that is, just really not acceptable, not required. So definitely we do have a position on that. And that's one of the areas, that I would consider egregious, and where, somebody, a neighbor could easily take a video and flip it in. Or, sometimes we do talk to people and they will turn off their engines, but it's hit and miss. And sometimes you get yelled at. And it's not fun. So I think that we do need to look at that. I do worry about, and Cathay's worries about people sitting in traffic, and we do have stop-start technology for vehicles now. EVs will start to, come into their own, but the transition will take another 10, 15 years. So,
Right.
and this was in the staff report, that we really do, have a huge dominance of ICE vehicles, ICE, internal combustion engine vehicles now, and we will have for quite some time. Trucks, I don't know. I mean, I really do think, though, that this is something that the city should look at in terms of if trucks are stuck there and they know they're practically know they're going to be stuck there for 10 minutes, is it possible to turn them off? Another area, by the way, which is somewhat related, and I didn't really get to in my 5 minutes, is diesel buses in schoolyards. And the report states that school boards indicated that diesel buses had to keep on schedule. Diesel is one of the most toxic things that kids can breathe. Yeah, I agree. Schedules are really important. And there may be a little lag time in restarting your engine if you're a diesel bus driver, whatever. But there's a lot of bad chemicals that come out of, gases that come out of these buses. Doesn't it make more sense to just say, look, turn them off when they're not moving? Yeah, parents are going to be informed that there may be a 5-minute lag time in the schedule sometimes because the bus had to be turned off. So I do appreciate the question, and I understand that King Edward is a very serious issue, and I wish I had a better solution, but I really do think it's something that should be looked at by the city. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to chat with you guys anytime about it. So, especially some of the socioeconomic demographics in that area.
Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate your presentation, and reaching kids, I think, is a really good way to do this. And I like the idea of the signage. I'm always giving out those slow down for us signs, and be happy to do it for idling as well. Frankly, I see a lot of parents idling outside of schools. Happens a lot. So you got to get to the kids for sure. No, I appreciate it. It's an education, and we start when they're young. This is weird, but when I was a kid, I remember there was a car that was idling in our schoolyard, and we all went out and pretended we were I Dream of Jeannie, and we played in the smoke because we had no idea it was toxic. Maybe that explains a lot right now. But we had no idea. We've learned a lot. We didn't think it was harmful. So that's it. Anyway, we lots of education, and start with the kids. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your delegation this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We will continue with our registered delegates, and I'll call upon William Van Geest from Ecology Ottawa. Good morning to you as well. You have up to 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And you can hear me okay? Great. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to address you. So we think these recommendations are headed in the right direction. So we applaud staff for that. A shorter permitted idling time means less air pollution, of course. This in turn means progress toward our commitment to zero emissions and improvements to public health. And the durations proposed in these recommendations are well supported. Scientifically, they're based on guidelines from Natural Resources Canada, as has been mentioned. Politically, the survey taken earlier this year showed that most Ottawans are in favor of these proposed durations. Lower limits may also help bylaw officers improve the bylaw's poor enforcement levels to date. The additional restrictions on idling at temperatures below and above the primary range of 0 to 27 degrees are also common sense and should be supported. Of course, there will be cases where idling may be necessary, and staff have reviewed and revised the exemptions in consultation with various groups. These recommendations are therefore an easy win. This is also an opportunity for Ottawa to catch up with peer municipalities. Toronto, Burlington, Kingston, and Vancouver, to name a couple, all have comparable restrictions. Indeed, it would be disappointing for Ottawa to fall behind, as we have so lamentably with our high performance development standards, our curbside waste disposal, and our climate change master plan. In short, this is a well-needed, easy win. We do, however, have a few additional recommendations. First of all, we call for no exemptions in school zones and other areas with high concentrations of vulnerable people, like daycares, seniors' homes, and the like. The only obstacle for this in school zones that the report mentions is school buses, which require idling for their operation. If this is the case, then permit only school buses to idle. But we must not subject kids with their fragile respiratory systems to the harmful toxins in exhaust. I should note that had the city answered our years-long call for the school bus fleet's electrification, this wouldn't be a problem. We also think signage should be erected in these areas that I just mentioned. While certainly right-of-ways have lots of signs, signage for standing vehicles is different from signage for moving vehicles. In short, one has time to read the sign because one has stopped. We understand that signage entails a cost, but what's the cost of deploying bylaw officers? And more importantly, what's the cost of subjecting our kids' lungs to the toxins in exhaust? I've mentioned the health effects of idling a couple times, and we have to wonder, why is there no mention of Ottawa public health in this report? Idling often occurs in areas with high pedestrian traffic. Shouldn't OPH have been consulted and recommendations from them incorporated? We were also wondering about the fine. It's currently at $500 according to the report, but as the report lays out, this is substantially more than our peer jurisdictions, which are more in the $100 to $200 range. We know that enforcement has been very poor, an average of only 7 citations per year. So we ask staff, is the fine size a factor in this poor enforcement, and would a range make more sense? We also find the technological limitations cited in the report as a barrier to video submissions by members of the public. That is, that the city's submission system can only receive files of 6 megabytes. A bit problematic. Surely in the 21st century, we can find a solution to this limitation. Finally, we believe that enforcement revenues should be directed to the city's efforts on school streets, one of which was piloted in Vanier in Conseillère Plante's ward in February. Not only do school streets go further to protect kids' lungs than the idling bylaw,
1 minute.
They keep kids safe from the physical dangers of car traffic. Of course, the Road Safety Action Plan budget would be another worthy recipient of fines. In closing, we urge you to take this easy win and approve these recommendations for our air quality, our emissions commitments, for public health, and even for Ottawans' pocketbooks. Thank you.
Thank you for your delegation this morning. I will turn to my colleague, Councillor Plante.
Hey, thank you for being here today, and thank you for mentioning our wonderful school street in Vanier. It went really, really well, and we're hoping to bring it back up, by the way, in January. And I would love for you to come see it. It was wonderful. So I'm going to sort of rephrase, I guess, the question I posed to cafes, because I'm on your website right now, and it doesn't look like there's anything on there about the idling of trucks on King Edward past 2014. Now, I could be wrong, by the way. It was just a quick search. What is the Ecologies Ottawa's position on that issue? Because as I was walking this morning, as I was walking to work, I live just off King Edward. There were trucks idling, waiting to get to the Quebec side and vice versa. So yeah, if you could tell me what that is, I would appreciate it.
Yeah. So we haven't waded into that issue in a meaningful way, and that's in no way a reflection of its seriousness. There's no question that this is a major problem. If I recall correctly, there's a case in the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal on this issue. I'm a little hazy in the details there. But as you mentioned, particularly the proximity to low-income communities is very disturbing. That kind of aligns with the results of our Breathe Easy reports, our air quality monitoring in, I think, is 2020, 2021, 2023, this correlation between poor air quality and low-income communities. So this is completely unacceptable, the emissions coming from King Edward, and to say nothing of the dangers to all the humans in the area. This, again, just a completely unacceptable situation. The some solution to divert vehicles is absolutely, I think, essential. My understanding of the proposed recommendations is that, unfortunately, trucks on King Edward wouldn't apply because they would be one of the exemptions, namely motionless vehicles in traffic. So my sense with this discussion is it doesn't apply, but again, I just think the seriousness of that problem needs to be underlined and the urgency of finding a real solution too.
Merci beaucoup, and thank you again for all your advocacy you guys do. It's wonderful. Merci.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you for your delegation this morning. It is appreciated.
Thank you, Chair.
Next, we'll hear from Kestrel Raggett from the Enviro Center. Welcome. Good morning to you. You have up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Good morning. My name is Kestrel Raggett, and I'm here on behalf of Enviro Center to express our support for the motion regarding the anti-idling bylaw and education campaign. We thought it was important to be here today, although the expert in this topic from Enviro Center was not able to attend. I'm attending in her place. As described in the staff report, idling vehicles contribute significantly to air pollution. Idling mostly occurs in high traffic areas like school zones and busy city streets, which can pose serious health impacts for our vulnerable populations like children. Idling vehicles cause harmful emissions that contribute to climate change. The city declared a climate emergency in 2019 and recognizes the need to take action to reduce emissions. Reducing the amount of time that a vehicle can idle is a step towards reducing largely unnecessary emissions. These policies and guidelines are a key part of the pathway towards a net zero future and a healthier environment. Engaging and informing residents through a public awareness campaign is also an important part of the recommendation. Many drivers are not aware of the harmful effects of idling and that it is largely unnecessary. We encourage the city to explore innovative ways of engaging residents on this topic and go beyond simple messaging with limited reach. We hope the city will engage with local businesses and schools to help them understand the bylaw, understand their signage needs, and also how they can take action to reduce idling. Thank you to staff for the report and the recommendations before us today. Enviro Center supports this motion. I will not be taking the full 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you were able to make it today on behalf of the Enviro Center. I do not see any questions from my colleagues, so thank you very much. Next, we have Professor Thomas Walker from Carleton University. Is Mr. Walker here or online?
Hello.
I see you there. Go ahead, sir. You have up to 5 minutes.
Great. Well, thank you, Council, for having me this morning. My name is Dr. Thomas Walker. I'm not speaking here on behalf of Carleton. I'm a professor in the Environmental Engineering Department. Previously, I've worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab on using satellite data to study Earth's air quality and climate change. Here I'm speaking as a concerned citizen and as a bit of a well-informed individual in the field. I've also worked very recently with Ecology Ottawa, so Mr. Van Geest, who spoke earlier, supporting their Breathe Easy campaign. So we helped them kind of source the data and analyze it. So Breathe Easy was a citizen science campaign. This was the third iteration of this, the third summer that they were taking measurements, my first time being involved. But it involved a wide range of volunteers that Ecology Ottawa was excellent in organizing. They took a ton of measurements during the summer. Some of these included those wildfire events where the air turned yellow. But the measurements were taken all across the city. So we planned to capture a wide range of wards, as the map shows here. These aren't the city wards. These are Ottawa neighborhood study boundaries that you're seeing in the black lines. And the data that you're seeing here is really, they're short-term snapshots. So the measurements were 20 minutes at most. And they're snapshots that are meant to kind of show the diversity of air quality across the city. So we do have a one provincial long-term monitor in downtown, but the air quality in the city really isn't a monolith. So this is particle matter pollution. And basically anything above a 10 on this scale, so everything that you see in red or orange is higher than it should be. We saw plenty of exceedance, times where the 20-minute average was exceeding what the daily average should be in last summer. And that's excluding the wildfires. As was stated before, all of the Breathe Easy campaigns have shown consistent negative correlation with mean neighborhood income. So that means folks who live in poorer parts of the community are more likely to experience worse air quality. Next slide, please. I wanted to also point to some of the evidence about air quality and idling specifically, and its relation to air quality. Staff did a great job of laying out what the climate impact might be of this. This is a study that was done in Toronto, and picking out exactly what's the air quality impact of idling is very difficult because you're looking for quite a small signal on top of a lot of other things that can vary. So usually it's with paired studies where you're looking at measurements that were close to a situation where there was idling compared to measurements where there wasn't. So for example, this is looking at near construction sites in the red box and then more distant from construction sites. This study concluded that there was about a 2 milligram per cubic meter increase in particle matter near those construction sites due to the presence of more diesel vehicles, due to the presence of more idling vehicles. And that's, for Toronto, a 2 milligram per cubic meter increase in particle matter is about 40% more than you would expect on average. So it's a very large increase. Next slide, please.
1 minute.
Thank you. Our Breathe Easy set data showed a similar cycle. Where here you can see, this is some data from Elmwood School where we took a longer time period, a couple of weeks, and averaging the data over the course of the day, you can see this kind of morning peak that would be associated with traffic. So it's associated with, this one is a bit harder to point specifically to idling because it includes all traffic. However, some of this bump in the morning time would be due to those vehicles. So again, I'm speaking in support of the motion. There's lots of data here, but I'll close my remarks there and I'd be happy to take any more questions from council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. The data is certainly fascinating. Thank you for presenting that this morning. Question from my colleague, Councillor Plant.
Thank you so much, Professor Walker. I was just wondering if you could, because I think you may have run out of time there. Could you talk about the effects of the pollution that you talked about in reference to low-income communities? Why is it we are more tolerant of these in areas where maybe people don't have the gravitas or the money or the time to advocate otherwise?
So that's an excellent question. So the data certainly shows that there is this persistent correlation, and it's not just an Ottawa problem. This has been shown in places like New York, Toronto, and I don't know that it's an intentional planning issue. It's more of, I think, a synergistic issue where you have a driving down of things like housing or rental costs near to places where you have pollution sources. So things like if you have a busy street like Endroit or proximity to the highway, those communities become less favorable for high-priced housing. And so over time, this builds up a lower income community in that area. I'm not an expert on housing, obviously, but I would surmise that is somewhat the reason. It's very difficult then to address that issue. But I think the direction that this motion is taking in terms of its approach, increasing enforcement, is an excellent idea. Increasing education, I think, is very important because there are long-standing, well-known biases and myths that persist about idling in the population, and that it happens more than it needs to, for sure. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor, for your time and your delegation this morning. It's appreciated. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Our last delegate this morning is Ms. Joan Freeman.
Good morning.
Good morning. We see you. You have up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Got my papers out of order here for a sec. Sorry about this. I'm part of a working group that sent you I sent you some information on some of the work we did in support of this review. But I'm part of a working group of 5 community associations, and we started that we're interested in idling. We started in 2020, and I think Jennifer Humphreys has shown you the picture of the posters with the school kids. That was one of our first initiatives, and that was super well received by both teachers and elementary school kids. So that was interesting. There's a little bit of a competition. And then the convoy really galvanized our group. A lot of downtown people got together and they were very concerned. The Centertown people were leading it, partly because of asthma issues that in fact some of the leaders of this had. And I sent you the information that we forwarded on to the previous committee and in support of the review. And I think it aligns, if you will, with some of it's basically research on what other cities have done, and it aligns with some of the research that staff have done. It's a bit dated now, but I think it's useful for everybody to know that. I want to state that we're fully in support of the new bylaw changes. We think what staff has come up with is, if you will, a bit of a Goldilocks solution. Puts you in the middle of what most and least progressive cities are doing. And I think it's also practical and can be implemented. But I think the real issue is the question of if it's implemented. If it's implemented, and I think this is important to realize, it'll make a difference in air quality and health. It'll save the city money and residents as well. And it will also reduce greenhouse gases a bit. So all of those things, and that's kind of at this time of tight fiscal issues and tough decision making, it's nice to have a win-win opportunity to decide on something. So it's good news. The catch is that it does need to be implemented. And I want to talk a bit about that. Others have talked about that as well. I'm going to restrict my comments to what I consider practical, low cost and cost effective implementation, sort of recognizing the situation that our city is in with financial issues right now. And on 2 main points. And one is to do with municipal itself, cost savings and leadership. And the second point is to do with more of the public enforcement. So on the municipality, our working group reviewed what other cities have been doing, and I was stunned. I came up with a report which I couldn't put my hands on this morning, unfortunately, but I will if you need it, from the city of Edmonton, which enforced a zero tolerance policy for idling among all of its vehicles that weren't exempt. And they saved millions and millions of dollars. So that was pretty amazing. I didn't realize it would be that much. And the other point on that is it was something to do that really exercised and showed leadership by the community politicians and staff to be able to do this. I think that we get so many comments about egregious examples of idling, that it would be nice to be able to show leadership on this. So I think if Ottawa worked towards zero tolerance like Edmonton, it would be a terrific way to save a lot of money, which we need, or save millions, not save some money, and also it would show some leadership. The second point is public enforcement. I think what's been talked about by Jennifer Humphreys and others, public education is essential and a good idea. There are some other low-cost effective means that other cities have done, and they do require to a degree some technical improvements, but some of these are pretty easy fixes. For example, you could put cameras in hotspots around schools, hospitals, event areas, sort of like you have cameras for speeding now. and this is all automated, so they're installed, and the amount of money revenue create from that would more than cover the cost of installing them. Another example would be public reporting, which New York has done, which I think has been talked about, where the public takes pictures and uploads them. And again, I think the solutions to this, or the way to do this, aren't very difficult. New York has generated a lot of money out of this, and people actually get a little bit of financial reward for doing it. So I just wanted to point a few of these out. I do support this. We support it, and I want to thank you and hope that this goes forward. It's a great initiative and something that's positive.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your delegation. There is a colleague who would like to ask a question, and I'll recognize Chair Menard.
Thank you very much, Chair. Joan, I just wanted to say thank you to you and your group for all the work you put in and the care you've shown for residents, and especially who this will affect most, which is our kids. So thank you for that work that you've done. That's it for me, Chair.
Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you, Chair Menard. Ms. Freeman, I have a question for you, if I may. You'd referenced the city of Edmonton. Was there a report that was provided after their zero enforcement idling bylaw had been implemented, and they were able to measure? You'd referenced money saved, or was that anticipated money saved when they were considering their changes?
That's a great question. And I have to admit that I found this in 2022, and I went through all my files and can't find it this morning and did a quick Google search. But if this, I believe it was after the fact, but that was 2 years ago now. I would be, if this would be useful, I'm happy to dig it up for you, but it may take me a little bit of time and forward it to you, but it may take me a little bit of time to do it in another cup of coffee.
Well, thank you. I don't want to put any undue hardship on you, but if it passes your desk again, I'd love to see it. So thank you.
Okay, great. I just send it to you or to all of the committee?
Well, I'll take it, and if I have any colleagues who are interested, I'm happy to share it with anyone. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. That concludes our delegates this morning, and colleagues, I'll just draw to your attention that we did receive some written correspondence on this subject as well, and that is in the shared drive for your review. Okay, questions for staff? Open the floor up. Councillor King.
Mr. Chair, we can't hear Councillor King at home.
For those online.
We can hear the chair and we can hear the clerk, but we cannot hear Councillor King.
Okay. Maybe I'll ask you.
Okay. I'll just test mine. Can you hear that, Councillor?
Yes, we can, Councillor.
Okay.
Councillor King, do you just want to try again? And
sure. Can you hear me now?
Hey, yeah, I can.
Okay, that's better. So, no, well, I had started off just thanking staff for the report, for the in-depth presentation that you provided to us today, as well as before this meeting. Did have a number of questions just based on some of the residents' concerns about the idling control bylaw just generally. So residents have noted the absence of a mechanism to submit idling infraction evidence in the form of 1-minute videos of idling motorists, which can assist bylaw with more responsive enforcement of excessive idling violations. I was just wondering if you can tell us whether different types of technologies, whether it be an online portal or other methods, are being considered.
Mr. Chair, yes, that's right. We consulted with IT staff in addressing this particular question. The issue now is that the city's technology doesn't allow the submission of videos through a portal. However, video submissions can still be emailed or provided directly to bylaw staff. I would defer to our bylaw staff to answer any questions about that. So it is possible to submit videos. It is currently not possible to submit them through a handy dandy portal, but we are continuing discussions with IT staff on that.
Okay, so then would we get a indication of an expected time that that technology would be made available?
I don't have an answer for you today, Mr. Chair, but it's certainly something that we can communicate again with IT about and then share the information we get.
Okay, I'm also pleased that there's a focus on education. I think that's something that we heard very clearly from residents as well, that they felt that the previous anti-idling education campaign was not long enough or repeated often enough to be effective. My understanding is that a member, I think it's probably Chair Menard, will be looking at potentially a direction around more education, but obviously ongoing educational and promotional campaigns would be beneficial. So I was just curious, what are the city's plans in terms of those campaigns, and whether the city is looking at really addressing education, the education component, by really enhancing the number of partners that we engage in, whether it's businesses, schools, or hospitals.
Mr. Chair, over the coming months, we expect to deal directly with those businesses that the councillor just mentioned, community partners, engaged parties that we consulted with during our review. We'll provide, of course, the results of the review and any information regarding council's decision on this bylaw. We'll also be working with internal partners, Ottawa Public Health, Bylaw and Regulatory Services, obviously, and our Public Information Branch to build out a strong communications plan. We'll leverage ottawa.ca, we'll leverage the city's social media channels, public service announcements, and we're also looking at potentially developing material to provide to community newsletters and those types of channels as well to make sure the outreach is as broad as possible.
That's excellent. I know that we need to continue to broaden education. So any approach or any tool that we can really enable to do that, we should continue to pursue. I'll be supporting this change to our bylaw. I think when it's compared to our current bylaw, the proposed new bylaw really does bring us in line with best practices as recommended by Natural Resources Canada and adopted by other major cities. And I think it also sends a clear message that Ottawa is serious about improving our air quality and reducing our carbon footprint. We heard about challenges in neighborhoods that have low income prevalence. I think that should be an area of focus as well. I share neighborhoods. I know the challenge with King Edward in Rideau Vanier. In Rideau Rockcliffe, we have a highway that borders a low-income prevalent neighborhood in Overbrook. So these are always concerns, and I think that we need to really think hard as to how we can always strengthen these types of initiatives to improve quality of life, especially for residents that face the most challenges in our city. But I really want to thank you for the work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, for those comments and questions. Councillor Brown, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff and the delegates for their presentations. I'm not sure if my question should be directed to Valerie or another member of the team who might be in the room, Mr. Chair. But my first question is it correct that the emissions calculated and provided in the presentation is the maximum potential benefit from the bylaw change and not what staff have been able to empirically prove or demonstrate?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The estimates are based off if every driver in the city were to reduce their daily idling by 2 minutes over the course of a year. So it would be considered best case.
Okay, thank you very much. And do we know on an annual basis how many emissions are produced by bylaw's fleet of vehicles when responding to service calls like this?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. I can say that about 90%, maybe even a little bit higher, of bylaw's current fleet is hybrid or fully electric vehicles. So the impact on the environment would be very low.
All right, thank you, Roger. And at what speed does a hybrid vehicle's electric engine turn off and the internal combustion engine turn on?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I can't answer that question for you. I have no idea.
Oh, that's okay. Thanks, Chief. The reason I asked that is if there's an emissions service call generated by a member of the public on Gilroy Road, which for my colleagues' edification is the very last road in the city of Ottawa in the southwest, which is approximately 75 kilometers away from Industrial Avenue. Most of that is highway driving. So if an officer is dispatched from HQ, and I recognize that they aren't always dispatched from HQ, that they're already out in the city doing other work. But if they have to drive down the highway, I don't think a hybrid vehicle is using the electric engine for that. And the transit time alone could be upwards of an hour. I know it takes me about 45 minutes to transit across my ward, and I never leave it. So when we're looking at the comparisons to sister cities to Ottawa, recognizing that all of urban Ottawa fits in my ward. And that's not to say how large Councillor Drew's ward is, or Councillor Kelly's, Councillor Kitt's, and a portion of Councillor Luloff's. It's not a one for one. It's not a like for like. I certainly think that the presentation is well-meaning and the changes are well-meaning, but it's always about the maximum potential benefit, but very hard to enforce. So, Chief, I know we have the information contained in the report in terms of the enforcement action with the current bylaw, but can you reiterate that for the members of committee? How many violations have been issued? How many verbal warnings?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Currently, over the last 5 years, we average about 270 service requests per year related to idling. The enforcement actions are fairly low. I would say about 7 charges annually and about 10 warnings annually as a result of those service requests.
And what's the financial implication of a charge?
Currently, the set fine is $500.
And so, I mean, and based on that information and what's contained in the report, about 6% of the requests made to the city are actually result in either a warning or an infraction notice. And about 2.6% of these requests result in that infraction notice. So even lower for that dollar value that we're generating. So it kind of sounds like 94% of the effort is wasted. And whether that's with Service Ottawa agents or bylaw officers having to attend the location. I know, Chief, in some cases, we send a letter instead of sending an officer, and that's usually what happens on the first request, but then every time after we typically send an officer. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, yes, thank you for the question, Councillor. Yes, that's correct. You're speaking about our alternate response program, so that's something where we can, if the vehicle or location's been identified, or the company, the fleet vehicle, we can send a warning letter directly to the registered owner of the vehicle, and we have been doing that. That is a change in the new vehicle, in the new bylaw now, is that we can, it is an offense now for the registered owner of the vehicle to allow a vehicle to idle, so it's going to be much easier for us to take enforcement action against the registered owner.
All right, thank you. So would you say, Chief, that the bylaw as it currently stands is challenging to enforce?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. Challenging, yes, because it does take time. It's resource intensive, obviously. But the way the bylaw is structured, it's actually fairly easy to, if the evidence is provided, it's easy for us to take enforcement action.
And with the update that's being proposed, will this bylaw be easier to enforce, or will those same challenges still exist?
The same challenges will exist, but certainly some of the changes to the bylaw will certainly make it easier for enforcement.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. And Chair, I appreciate the time and the indulgence of our colleagues. I really don't think the proposed changes are ready for prime time yet. I struggle to understand if we're trying to really talk about education instead of enforcement, why we wouldn't just come forward with an upgraded communication strategy so we can talk about the benefits of shutting your car off and not idling. And as our colleagues know, I drive an electric vehicle, so this isn't anything to do with anti-environment. What we really need to focus on, though, is a bylaw that can be enforced, that has at least some kind of chance of not wasting staff time and precious tax dollars. I said yesterday that we need to be really looking at every penny spent in this city, and I don't think this bylaw is going to help do that. So, Mr. Chair, in a few minutes, I might have a motion that I would like to table, but I'm working with the clerk's office now. As soon as it's ready, I'll be sure to share that with you and our council colleagues. Thank you for the time, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, for your comments and questions. Councillor Curry, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm inclined to support this. I'm going to support this, not just inclined. I just have a couple of questions because I had a number of emails on this, and I think like councillors around me, I think Councillor Kavanaugh was saying, you know, this waiting in front of schools is something that we get emails on all the time. It's very frustrating for everybody, whether people live there and have to breathe in the smoke or if it's just kids. I mean, I have situations in Canada that I know where because parents want to get first in line to pick up their student, they're using their car as an office. And they're on their hotspot and they've got their computer set up and they're taking their calls and working in their car so that they can get first in line to pick up their child. So I think an education campaign is absolutely fundamental. But I had some really good feedback from Canada residents. And I want to just go through some of the questions I had. I did in the briefing, but I think it'd be helpful for others to hear the answers as well. So one of the questions that came to me was, what about freezing rain? And I know we've talked a little bit about that. So, we get a lot of freezing rain in Ottawa. That's at a temperature of 0, 1 degree, -1. What would happen when we have a freezing rain advisory warning? The entire city, city staff have sent out warnings to people. People are having their car idling for longer, trying to get the ice off their windshield. They come out from work, right? They've got an inch of thick ice on their windshield. What would happen in that situation?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. Great question. Officers always have enforcement discretion, and in situations like this where we know that ice is forming on the windshield, officers would use discretion in this case and would allow the vehicle to idle to ensure the safety of the vehicle and for the drivers and occupants of the vehicle.
Great, thank you for that. I think that will be very important, right? The training of your officers in terms of discretion will be important. And that leads me to the next example where residents are writing in and saying, what about a situation where someone is coming out of a hospital, they've just had chemo, they're supposed to get into a warm environment, it's -30 in Ottawa, that their relative is sitting in the car, has to keep the car warm for them. So this is a medical need or any, that's just the specific example I was given, but what would happen in that situation?
Mr. Chair, again, great question, Councillor. There is an exemption for medical letters, so we would first ask if there was. I would say that even in a case where, because they had just gone through chemo and, it would be something that the officer would use discretion on again. So again, we're not focusing our enforcement in these type of situations. This is for blatant disregard of the bylaw. And in cases like this, I would suggest that the officer would use discretion and allow that vehicle to idle.
Great, thank you very much. The other comment, I think other councillors may have gotten this as well, and I think we talked about this a little bit about people using it as a weapon. So weaponizing this bylaw. So, a neighbor calls on another neighbor. I mean, that's a big part of your life in bylaw, I think, trying to manage all of that. But, you know, in particular, say, you know, somebody lives near a school and thinks, okay, here's my chance. I'm gonna get this, you know, car in front of my house with a fine. Maybe you can speak a little bit about your progressive approach, because, you know, if we talk about education, how important it is that people are aware of the impact, and then bylaw has a progressive approach to that situation. Maybe you could explain how that may prevent that weaponizing of this.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. Yes, a progressive enforcement model for most of our bylaws. We always have a three-step approach. So first, we either a written warning is left in the mailbox, or we speak to the owner of the vehicle or the occupant of the vehicle. Second offense would be a written warning, and third offense could result in a charge. I would also offer that, you know, we're obviously involved in many of these situations where neighbors are complaining against neighbors, and our officers are trained to recognize situations like that. And again, enforcement discretion would be used in situations like this where we believe that the bylaw is being weaponized against another neighbor.
Great. Thank you very much for explaining that. The last comment I will make is based on an email that was sent to all of us. Chair Brockington, you'll recall the woman that wrote in and talked about stickers that could go in city vehicles that just simply say no idling. So reminding our drivers at the city, you know, make sure you're remembering our own bylaw and the amount of money that that might save. So, you know, that alone, you know, I understand this is more of an education campaign, and I think that will be helpful. I remember when this first came out in Ottawa, and I actually thought about this. Oh yeah, I guess I don't need to be idling. Why am I idling? I could turn my car off. I think this will further enhance that. And then for our own vehicles, to remind drivers, if there were a sticker or even just consistent reminders, that would save the city quite a lot of money just in gas alone. So I don't see that I mean, I understand some of the concerns and, you know, the difficulty in enforcing this bylaw, but I don't think any of that is as important as making sure we are in line with other cities and I think doing the right thing. So I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Curry. Councillor Luloff, you were on my list next. You dropped off. You came back on. I'm going to recognize you now and then continue with the order that we have. So, Councillor Luloff.
Thanks, Chair. The reasons for this bylaw are sound. There's really no doubt about that. Idling is deleterious to our health. It's a nuisance, and it's costly in so many ways. And I would love to eliminate unnecessary idling. It drives me nuts. It's bad for our kids and it's bad for our environment. But this bylaw is not truly enforceable. And even in the cases that it is, it'll be spotty at best because it will be complaint-based and subject to officer availability. You know, our bylaw team can't even respond to a noise complaint while it's ongoing. How do we think that they're going to be able to get to an idling vehicle within a minute, let alone the current 5? Chief Chapman just told us that 7 charges and 10 warnings is the best that we can do in 5 years. That's not his fault. He works hard, and so do his staff. But to get 270 complaints and only have 17 of them come to some sort of resolution doesn't exactly qualify as a success or a good use of our resources. Strengthening an already unenforceable bylaw, I don't think is the play here. Common sense is. Bylaw already is strapped as it is, responding to neighbor disputes about every petty subject under the sun. And they can't even respond to the bylaws that are enforceable in a timely fashion. Not to mention the price of fuel right now. The only people who think that they can afford to idle are the government vehicles who are spending your money while they do it. And we're exempting the majority of them anyway. Those who are idling unnecessarily can be reprimanded for it under the current bylaw as it stands today if it's enforced properly. You know, I do have some suggestions for cutting down on idling here in the East End and across the city, like engage in an information campaign immediately. Build the Brian Coburn extension with a BRT to encourage transit ridership and allow for South Orleans to get to their destination faster. A lot of people sitting in traffic, burning fossil fuels. Animate the Chapel Hill Park and Ride and shuttle people to the LRT. Fix the bus system and build confidence so less cars are sitting in traffic. And put in anti-idling devices on city vehicles. Right now, while we discuss this matter, there are people waiting for a bus that won't come, people worrying about how they're going to afford their next hydro bill, people tripping on broken sidewalks in Cumberland Village. Someone's driving around with an air tag under their bumper and they'll wake up in the morning without the vehicle that they used to get their kids to daycare. And some poor soul is probably lying on the street in center town or in Byward Market, suffering from mental health issues. We can't balance our budget without tax hikes this year, and we're not building enough homes to meet demand in our city. But that's not what we're discussing here today. That's not how we're spending our time. We need to get our priorities straight. This is an important issue. Please don't get me wrong, but our city is in cardiac arrest and we have it sitting in the barber's chair for a nice haircut. It's going to look good, but it's not going to solve the real problems that we have. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor, for that. Chair Menard, you are next.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask staff about why the existing bylaw needs updating and some of the process that you went through to do that. So I'll take you through a couple of scenarios. Right now, the existing bylaw does not allow for some exemptions that you did research on and worked with different departments. Can you just go into a bit more detail about where the existing bylaw does not allow those exemptions and why the updating of this bylaw is important for some of those exemptions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As part of this bylaw review, we are recommending some updates to current exemptions. For example, the medical letter exemption that is under the current bylaw that permits idling for medical reasons can only be obtained by a medical doctor. But in consultation with the Accessibility Advisory Committee, we are recommending to expand the list of medical professionals that can issue such a letter if needed. We are recommending some changes to existing definitions to really improve clarity and the applicability. And we are recommending as well exemptions in situations where we have heard that it's required. So we have done work on the exemptions and we have consulted extensively on those as part of this review.
Thank you for that. The existing bylaw, as I understand it, is not in force for 245 days a year. And I've heard my colleagues talk about the laudable benefits of reducing idling. I'm wondering, does the updated bylaw then ensure that there is a bylaw in place for the majority of the calendar year?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The recommendation is for a 5-minute idling maximum when the temperature is colder than 0 degrees or warmer than 27 degrees, including humidex. And that is to address the gap in the current bylaw where there is an exemption for occupied vehicles in hot and cold weather that amounts to about 8 months a year without an idling time limit in effect.
Okay, thank you for that. And we've heard some comments around the potential cost to enforce or the cost to the city. Is it true that Ottawa will have a larger cost as a result of the updated bylaw, or are there savings that come to both residents and the city when it comes to our fleet savings and the gas savings that we've been seeing as a result of the idling restrictions that are in existence now and will be further recommended as part of the new bylaw?
Mr. Chair, part of our information campaign will be including information to build awareness around cost savings that reducing idling even just a little bit every day can achieve. In terms of overall cost savings to the city, we know that our work aligns with the green fleet strategy that's being worked on and will be brought forward later this fall to not only green the city's fleets, but also provide better information and education to corporate drivers around reducing unnecessary idling. In terms of costs of application, implementation, and enforcement, I would defer to Chief Chapman.
Yeah, maybe Chief Chapman, I'll jump onto that question or add onto that question, because I had understood that this will be enforced within the existing complement of bylaw officers, that there's not reallocation happening in that regard. And I just want to get confirmation on that.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. Yes, that's correct. It'll be within existing resources.
Okay, thank you for that. And just finally, I agree with colleagues that a lot of this is about education. The alternative, though, is having the old bylaw, which needs significant updating and doesn't include these new exemptions staff have come forward with, or having no bylaw whatsoever, which also doesn't help with education or any type of discussion about the issue publicly. So I guess would staff agree that a lot of this is education, and that we as a municipality have that as part of our plan going forward with OPH and others, and to that point I'll likely put a direction to staff after I hear back from staff on this question.
Mr. Chair, yes, our policy approach when we were directed to review this bylaw by council was to review all of the components of the bylaw thoroughly and based on evidence, input, and research, recommend updates to it. As the councillor said, it hasn't been updated since 2007. There are definitely two components to what we're recommending today: the information and education piece, and then the corresponding updates in regulations. Part of what we're trying to achieve is to update council's standards so that hopefully drivers will choose to reduce their idling, their unnecessary idling where possible. We hope to bring people into compliance. We hope people will follow suit. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have improved the enforcement tools a little bit so that where enforcement is required and warranted, there are additional tools for our bylaw staff as well.
I've also heard that, this bylaw is kind of reactive. I think a lot of our bylaws are reactive. It's when, somebody calls and alerts to an issue. You can't be everywhere at every time. So I'm going to put a direction to staff along my colleagues' comments about education, because I agree that is probably the most important thing with this as well. So the direction is that the General Manager of Emergency and Protective Services Department work with the Public Works Department to have signs installed urging drivers to be mindful of unnecessary idling below the 16 8x4 existing unsigned parking regulation information signs located along high volume corridors across the city, with a one-time total production installation cost of $6,000 to be funded within existing departmental budgets. Thank you, Chair.
And just on that note, have staff comment on that direction, please.
Thank you, Chair. The department does take the direction and is able to find the funds within the direction that's being provided.
Okay, thank you. And that's no further comments, questions? Okay. Vice Chair Carr, you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for this presentation. I've read the report, listened to the questions and the delegations. I'll be supporting this bylaw, and I would encourage my colleagues to do the same. This bylaw is primarily about education and recognizing that our behaviors have to change, and even incremental changes assist. Just with respect to, I heard one of my colleagues, I think it was Councillor Brown, wondering why this is not just about education. Part of the reason, and I think he expressed also concerns about, potential costs. Part of the reason why it's not just about education is because the previous council voted, I think it was almost unanimous, on having staff look at this, and they've already invested a significant amount of costs in doing so. We heard them highlight how much consultation has gone into this, looking at best practices, looking at other jurisdictions. So we've already got a sizable sunk cost on that. I don't believe that this truly is about enforcement, nor should it be. I think that the enforcement aspects offers us opportunities such as those in the convoy, for example, when we're already down ticketing and looking at people breaking the law and having the opportunity to leverage another bylaw for a fine. I do think an incremental approach is important. Councillor Curry mentioned when her experience when the first bylaw came in, and wondering, do I really need to be idling? That really happened to me. My kids were born in 2004, 2006. I used to take them all the time to mom and baby activities and play groups and this and that, and I would always put them in the car, turn the car on, and then load up the stroller and the groceries. And after that bylaw came in, it made me think a lot about my behavior. I'd always done that. And just in terms of, they're in their snowsuits, do I have to start the car? And I know that it did change my behavior, just the fact that we had an idling bylaw. I wasn't expecting a bylaw officer to come in around and, charge me. It was just knowing that behaviors that change. And I think incremental change for behaviors over time is really important. When I think about, I was one of the older members on this council and, born in the very early 70s and grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I used to drive around in a station wagon with simulated wood paneling, no car seats, all of us jammed in the back. The smoke would be blue from my dad smoking his Rothmans. And over time, we had car seat legislation introduced. We had seatbelt legislation introduced. We had smoking. And so things do take time for a change in behavior. I remember, going to my grandma's and her making, we had Thanksgiving dinner, and I remember the bags of empty Miracle Whip jars and Spam cans and fruit cocktail cans, because we didn't even have recycling. And over time, we have now waste limits, we have recycling. I think we definitely have better food choices from a public health perspective, but it does take time for changes in behavior to be implemented. And that's why I'll be supporting this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Although Thanksgiving Spam and fruit cocktail, I'm not sure about that combination.
We could have I can make you a fruit jelly sandwich and a Spam sandwich if you'd like, Chair.
Fair enough. Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Carr. Or sorry, Councillor Kavanagh.
I can't top that Thanksgiving dinner. Thank you. I wanted to know, is there any kind of budget for signage? We've heard about that, and there, just in terms of schools, like to offer school signage. We have the Slow Down for Us signs that we put everywhere, but particularly around schools, that we could offer, a few signs per school and let the schools handle it.
Mr. Chair, no, I'm not aware of such a budget. That being said, if schools, and we did consult with school boards and as many private schools as we could as part of this work. That being said, if schools would like to reach out and collaborate with us on an information education campaign, be more than happy to have that happen. And again, nothing in this bylaw prevents a school from installing idling information signs on its own private property, of course.
Okay, but we're not willing to do it to create signage.
Mr. Chair, I am not aware of any budget that's available for that.
Could that be looked into just to see what a cost is? Because we do the Slow Down for Us signs, very popular, but this is pretty targeted, so it's not as big. This is around schools only, and this is an area that we're trying to educate people, and I think it would have a direct impact. Surely it can come out of an education budget. Can that be looked into?
Can you just clarify, are you implying a metal sign on a metal post or
no,
the
like
chloroplast?
The chloroplast signage, like we have, identical to the Slow Down for Us, to distribute. If we're doing education material, this is where people are. Putting it on a flyer inside the schools, they're not going to see it. So that's, could that be looked into?
Mr. Chair, we can take that back and do an assessment on the costs.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I was going to say trustee, Councillor Kavanagh. Councillor Devine had fallen off. I'm going to recognize him next. So Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. So I am certainly supportive of the bylaw change because I do support its environmental objectives, because they are absolutely important. And yes, as my colleague said previously, our city is facing many severe challenges, and I agree with his metaphor that our city is in cardiac arrest. To use another medical diagnosis, you could say that our city is experiencing severe acute asphyxiation. You can either look at that as a metaphor, or you can look at that as a current state of affairs that this bylaw change is seeking to address. But I do recognize that there are certainly challenges in the implementation and enforcement of this bylaw. But I also appreciate that the changes recommended in this bylaw are based on well-founded research and established best practice in cities like Toronto and Burlington and Kitchener. So we heard yesterday from OC Transpo General Manager Emil Carr that every dollar counts. and that we are willing to go to great lengths to find those savings. In the matter of combating climate change, I think that any reduction in greenhouse gas emission counts and that we should pursue it, especially if reducing engine idling is, as the delegate from CAFE said, low-hanging fruit. Ottawa is facing so many challenges that we need to grab that fruit when it's there for the picking. But I want my colleagues to understand that the very fact that we are changing this bylaw is going to have a net positive effect. Simply by changing the bylaw and effectively communicating that change and the reasons for that change, that will accomplish a net positive effect. As long as we communicate it effectively, people are going to change their behavior, and that is fundamentally important. So I've got a few questions on education. They've been largely asked by some of my colleagues, but one specific measure I heard referred to that I want to ask if staff is willing to consider, for example, is staff willing to consider, and forgive me if this was already discussed, something like a citywide mail out as we've done with the implementation and education of the 3-item curbside waste policy. That would get into the hands of everyone. Are we considering that kind of component to our education?
Chair, we can consider that, subject to budget and also consultation with public information media relations.
I appreciate that, and I trust that staff realizes that the education and communication elements of this are fundamental to its success, and so I will be looking to see that staff is investing in the education and communications of that. Otherwise, we're setting this up for failure here. So my challenge, as I've communicated with staff, is always going to be on the enforcement elements of this bylaw, because education without some level of effective enforcement it won't be effective. I do agree with my colleagues that I am not interested in laborious, expensive, low-yield enforcement. If we are going to go fishing, I want us to go fishing where there's a lot of fish in the pond. Mr. Chapman, on that note, can you envision that there is a likelihood where your department would be able to send a handful of bylaw officers out to locations where people are most likely to be in violation of this bylaw? And as an example, in February, you could send bylaw officers to any City of Ottawa park and ride at 5 p.m. on a weekday and possibly catch dozens of people in violation of the bylaw. Is that the kind of proactive enforcement that that bylaw is willing to consider?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. There's a cost to doing that for sure. But yes, when we speak about focused enforcement in certain areas and problematic areas, that is something that we could consider, is having a few officers at a specific area at a specific time of day to again, enforcement comes in many different ways. It's not just charges. We talked about the progressive enforcement model. It may be warnings and providing some education rather than just charges.
Thank you. And I agree that all enforcement comes at a cost, but what we always look for is what's the greatest benefit and return on that cost. And if right now we have 270 complaints per year yielding 5 actual issuances of fines, I'm sure that ratio could be improved with that kind of targeted proactive enforcement. So, Mr. Chair, knowing that enforcement is always going to be a challenge, I do have a direction to staff that I believe has staff support. So if the committee clerk could put it up on the board, I'll read it out. Thank you. So, that bylaw and regulatory services be directed to provide information to council concurrent with or prior to budget 2025 on the estimated cost and any potential funding sources that would be required to hire up to 2 summer student bylaw officers for a focused enforcement campaign of the new idling bylaw during the summer of 2025, which would see the summer student officers undertake a progressive enforcement model that includes an educational component.
And again, I'll just turn to staff for comment on the direction, please.
Thank you, Chair. We'll take the direction with the proviso that it's subject to the budget process. Thank you.
Yeah, the key bit here is that the councillor right now is asking for information. So what would it cost and take to implement this if we proceed? That's correct, Councillor Devine? You're asking for information.
As opposed to asking staff if they'd be willing to support the
The direction clearly states in the first line that they are directed to provide information on what you've just mentioned in the direction. So we're going to get the information and then decisions will have to be made, whether we proceed, whether it's financed, whether it's prioritized.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other comments or questions, Councillor?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Bradley, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentation. I'm really more interested in the practical implementation of this bylaw, and I have a very specific incident in my ward that has been problematic that I'm sure some of my colleagues share. I'm not as interested in proactive enforcement for every minute someone is idling longer than the bylaw. I don't think that that's the intent, to be aggressive in that manner. But for me, what was exciting about this update was that it was going to close that gap where now we have 245 days a year where we have no bylaw in place because of the weather restrictions. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chair, yes.
So I have a business in my community that we have nuisance idling that is just for operator convenience. They abut a residential area, and I get complaints from residents all the time if we could address this idling issue. But because we have such a gap in when we have a bylaw in place, it's impossible to get any enforcement. So my interest in supporting this bylaw is particularly around instances like that, not to target everyday residents who are warming up their car, but to target nuisance idling for businesses like this that are driving my residents crazy, and we've not been able to enforce effectively. So is this bylaw going to help in scenarios like that?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. And yes, that's a perfect example of where the this new bylaw and the new provisions that are being introduced in this bylaw would assist with enforcement efforts.
So I'm just going to be very transparent. That's why I'm throwing my support behind this change. I don't want to see aggressive enforcement of 1 minute idling. I want to address the nuisances that we're seeing in our communities that are having real impacts on residents. So I'll be supporting this bylaw change on that notion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, all the way from the FCA. Welcome. You're next.
Hi, thank you. And similar to the previous speaker, I'm very interested in the impacts that we can have on specific casework issues where we currently don't have any recourse. Can you go over again what the difference is between the proposed new bylaw and the existing bylaw when it comes to issuing a fine to the vehicle owner versus the driver?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yeah, so the introduction of the provision to hold the registered owner of the vehicle accountable for idling vehicles. So it's not just about providing identification for the operator of the vehicle, which sometimes can be challenging. We can now issue charges or take enforcement action against the registered owner of that vehicle.
So certainly in my neighborhoods that are experiencing construction infill, this would be very interesting because those construction vehicles now could be the owner of those vehicles versus the operators could now be caught under the bylaw. And I think for those who are experiencing infill, generally speaking, this would be of interest. Similarly, are city vehicles currently subject to the existing idling bylaw?
Mr. Chair, under the current bylaw, the City of Ottawa's vehicle and equipment idling policy is exempted. So that is to say, under the current bylaw, that city vehicles are exempted. The recommendation with the updated bylaw is to remove that exemption.
Okay, so again, I think this is something that we really need to move forward with. The complaints that I get in my neighborhoods are often to do with city vehicles on work sites idling for operator convenience. And of course, there is a cost there to taxpayers because we provide the gas for those vehicles. So not only are we inconveniencing residents, but we are paying for that inconvenience in a sense. So let's move forward with updating this bylaw so that we can close these gaps that, when looked at, I think from a very pragmatic way, are horribly outdated. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson, for those comments as well. Councillor Brown, are you still with us?
Yes, I am, Chair.
There you are. You had mentioned when you spoke that you were working on a motion. I have been provided a copy, so if it is your intent to put it on the floor, this is the time.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to do so.
Okay, so if you could please read it and introduce.
All right, thank you very much, Chair and colleagues. Whereas the idling control bylaw is presently very challenging to enforce, and whereas the proposed changes contemplated in the staff report will put further pressure on bylaw and regulatory services while also reducing enforceability, and whereas it is poor practice to introduce bylaws as a public awareness tool when the city has extensive public communications tools at its disposal, and whereas staff have failed to demonstrate that the changes proposed in the report will meaningfully reduce net emissions, opting instead to provide the Joint Committee with unsubstantiated information about the maximum potential benefit of the proposed changes, and whereas the Joint Committee does not have sufficient information to justify approving the proposed changes to the idling control bylaw, therefore be it resolved that the Joint Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee and Environment and Climate Change Committee refer the report back to staff and direct staff to return to the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee with the following new information. A, what are the net emissions changes anticipated by the staff proposed bylaw based on both the actual changes in resident idling behavior and the emissions produced by increased bylaw activity? B, what can be done to improve enforceability of the existing bylaw prior to introductions of greater restrictions? C, to what extent would different approaches for idling inside and outside of the city's urban boundary help improve overall enforceability of the bylaw? D, since May of 2021, how many employee hours and how much in staff costs have been incurred on working on this bylaw? E, since May of 2021, how many external consultants have been contracted and at what cost were these contracts issued? Be it further resolved that staff proposed an updated version of the idling control bylaw that retains the current exemptions and the proposed additional exemptions proposed in the report, but retains all other provisions of the current bylaw. And be it further resolved that staff be directed to conduct a dedicated communications campaign directed at discouraging idling and informing residents of the climate benefits of reducing idling. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, for putting that on the floor. Before I take questions from colleagues, I do want an opportunity for staff to comment on the motion. There's basically three parts, the three therefore clauses. If staff could just provide thoughts, I would appreciate it to set the table before we entertain questions or comments from committee members.
Thank you, Chair. Upon review of the motion, there is a significant work that's entailed to determine the work effort that's already gone into place. None of the items are impossible for staff to address or to collate or to collect the information as requested, recognizing that there is both a time constraint and a level of effort that would be required by staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, part one, just to be crystal clear for all joint committee members, is to refer this back. So if we support this today, this committee's work is done. We're referring it back. We will not be voting on the staff motion before us. If it's defeated, then obviously we will. But part two, if staff could comment, part two is proposing that an updated version of the bylaw that retains the current exemptions and the proposed additional exemptions proposed in report go ahead, but retains all other provisions of the current bylaw. So that seems different than what you're proposing. So again, staff comment on the second clause, please.
Chair, staff at this point believe that the work has been done to this point, and the level of effort to repeat some of the effort would be significant. And lastly, I think overall, with respect to the bylaw work plan and the original intent coming from committee and council, that this is not necessarily consistent with the requests that were made as part of the budget, or sorry, the bylaw work plan.
Okay, thank you. And just on the third clause, which is requesting a dedicated communications campaign, can you please comment on that clause?
Chair, currently staff are working towards that objective. And it is something that is currently in progress. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Okay, Councillor or Vice Chair Carr, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. My first question is actually a procedural one. I've noted that Councillor Brown's motion directs back to the Emergency and Protective Services Committee. However, this is actually a joint meeting, and I'm wondering if this motion is even allowed in that case.
Yeah, it would. That's a great question. Councillor Brown, was that just an oversight, or were you wanting it to go back to one committee and not the joint committee?
Thank you, Chair. No, that was deliberate. The basis of my concerns is all about the operational ability of this, and bylaw comes under the Emergency Protective and Services Committee.
Okay, and maybe I'll ask the city clerk for comment, please.
My hand's still up, by the way.
Mr. Chair, the joint committee could approve a motion that would see this come back to one or the other of those committees or to the joint committee as it sees fit.
Thank you for that clarification. Vice Chair, any other comments?
Yeah, certainly. I guess I have a question for the mover of the motion. I noted in your comments with respect to the idling bylaw that is proposed before us, you expressed concern about resources of staff being put into enforcement of the bylaw. Do you have any concerns with the resources that would be required to do the work that you've outlined in your motion?
Thank you for the question, Chair, or through you, Chair. I would prefer to see good policy come forward that will save staff's time in the field. I think that would be a wise investment for this committee and council.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. So you're not concerned about the level of resources?
Not if we draft a policy that is more enforceable, that achieves the goals of the city, no.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Kavanagh.
Thank you, Chair. I have an issue with a motion that will basically take away my vote because I'm on the Environment Committee. If it's only going to emergency services, so I cannot support this, and I feel very strongly that the staff have put a lot of work into this and have thought this through, and appreciate what they've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? I will give Councillor Brown an opportunity to wrap up. My direction is to vote against this. I believe that staff have brought forward a sound recommendation to revise the idling bylaw. And I believe that if Councillor Brown or frankly any member of the joint committees or council would like additional information, they can work with staff or file an inquiry in this regard. But Councillor Brown, I will give you the final word.
Thank you very much, Chair. No final word required. I think our colleagues have heard plenty from me today, so I just call for the vote.
Thank you. So is it best to have a recorded vote or yeas and nays? Okay, so on Councillor Brown's deferral motion, yeas and nays, please.
Councillor Bradley.
No.
Councillor Brown.
Yes.
Councillor Curry.
No.
Councillor DesRoches.
No.
Councillor Devine.
No.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson? No.
Sorry, no.
Councillor Kavanagh.
No.
Councillor King.
No.
Councillor Luloff.
Yep.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Sorry, Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Plante.
No.
Councillor Hill, Vice Chair Hill.
Yes.
Vice Chair Carr.
No.
Vice Chair Menard
No.
and Chair Brockington.
No.
Twelve nays, 4 yeas.
So that motion is defeated. Any other speakers on this item? So the motion before us is that the Joint Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee and Environment and Climate Change Committee recommend to Council, 1, approve the proposed idling control bylaw as described in this report and in the general form set out in document 1, and repeal the idling control bylaw known as bylaw 2007-266, and part 2, repeal section 16 of the noise bylaw 2017-255 as amended pertaining to the regulation of noise for idling vehicles as described in this report. Yeas and nays, please.
Chair, may I ask for a separation on the two items? Votes on both, please.
Yes, we can vote on parts 1 and 2 separately. Yes, the motion itself be put on the screen, please. So everyone can see that. Okay, so I am going to call the question. We will vote on part 1 first, yeas and nays.
Councillor Brad, excuse me, Councillor Bradley,
Yes.
Councillor Brown,
No.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Councillor Desroches,
Yes.
Councillor Devine,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas,
No.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Councillor King,
Yes.
Councillor Luloff,
No.
Councillor Tierney,
No. No.
Conseillère Plante,
Oui.
Vice Chair Hill,
No.
Vice Chair Carr,
Yes.
Chair Menard,
Yes.
and Chair Brockington.
Yes.
11 yeas, 5 nays.
The motion or part 1 carries, and now the recorded or the yeas and nays on part 2.
Councillor Bradley,
Yes.
Councillor Brown,
No.
Councillor Curry,
Yes.
Conseillère Desroches,
Yes.
Councillor Devine,
Yes.
Councillor Dudas,
No.
Councillor Johnson,
Yes.
Councillor Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Councillor King,
Yes.
Councillor Luloff,
No.
Councillor Tierney,
No.
Conseillère Plante,
Oui.
Vice Chair Hill,
No.
Vice Chair Carr,
Yes.
Chairman Hard,
Yes.
and Chair Brockington.
Yes.
11 yeas, 5 nays.
Part 2 carries. Do we have any public or any inquiries for today's meeting?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councillor.
Did we properly dispense with the directions to staff? I thought they were tabled. I didn't hear you kind of call the questions on those. If you did, then I just want to record my dissent on both of the directions. I'm not even sure why they're directions. To me, they're substantive and they probably should be in the format of a motion, but if you've allowed them to go forward, that's fine, but please record my dissent on them.
Thank you, Councillor. We will. In both circumstances, I asked staff to comment. They were accepting of the direction. The latter from Councillor Devine was simply to provide information. And the other, which I don't have at my fingertips, staff were in agreement with accepting that direction. So I allowed them to proceed, and your objection will be noted.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Colleagues, seeing no inquiries, that completes the business of this joint committee. Thank you again to staff. Just before we adjourn, I'll mention it is now 12 o'clock. So I'll say it. We are expected for the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee to meet, and that will be at 12:20. So for those of you on the committee, 12:20, the joint 12:30. 12:30 it is, but the joint session is now adjourned. Thank you.